I've been using a projector for the past few months to trace out my digital sewing patterns rather than print and tape. I've had a few folks ask me how this works, so I figured I'd bring you along as I do a little tracing and prep for an upcoming project or two. We're going to go through all the whys and hows. Why would you want to use a projector? How do I use the projector? Should you use a projector? How much does this cost? I'll try to answer as many of the questions I remember from my comments as I can. You'll notice the tracing and the talking were recorded separately, and that's because tracing can be a lot of physical work. I traced out about 5 patterns in one afternoon and evening, and by the end I was a sweaty mess who just wanted to get the job done and not talk to a camera. I chose to do my tracing on a relatively cool day, but between moving around and the exhaust fan from the projector, tracing mare needed a shower. I guess the first takeaway is plan to get messy and do your tracing on a day when you're looking forward to a good scrub afterwards. Unless, of course, you handle activity and warmth extremely well. Tracing mare is going to get on with it while we chat. But first, I'd like to thank my supporters on Patreon and channel memberships. While obtaining my projector was a lot less difficult than I imagined, it was still an upfront cost at a time when I'm still trying to break even from buying things like fabric and notions. My supporters not only allow me to afford a few expenses like the projector, and I think a couple of years ago I managed to save for the camera I'm recording this video with, they also encourage me to keep creating, keep sewing, and keep experimenting with the kinds of videos I make. So thanks, folks. I definitely appreciate the assist. If you're not into that kind of commitment, though, that's perfectly fine. I'm just happy you're here. If you could possibly boop the like button and or hit subscribe if you aren't already, that would be fantastic. Or stay till the end of the video. You'd be surprised how much that helps and hopefully gives me an opportunity to either inform or entertain you. So, why use a projector? My reasons for moving to a projector are very simple. I need a way to access my patterns quickly without a lot of expense. Not wasting a lot of paper is also very important. I don't claim to be a rabid environmentalist, but I do live in a country that's been cutting down trees for over 200 years, and I'd rather reduce my demand on that particular industry. Some folks prefer to send their digital files to a company that will print their pattern on large sheets of paper using a plotting printer. That doesn't work so well when you get the itch to start a project at midnight or find the perfect pattern on one day and want to start sewing the next. Have I done this? Yes. Yes, I have. Printer ink isn't cheap and you can go through a lot of paper. There's a lot of space around pattern pieces in a print-at-home pattern, not to mention the amount of overlap required to line up the pieces. What if you get everything printed out and realize the printer wasn't calibrated correctly, or you accidentally printed the A4 size instead of North American letter, or, even worse, it printed at fit to page instead of 100% scale? For me, it was sitting there trying to piece the Ellie and Mac classic camisole pattern together with tape for the second or third time, I think, using my artist's light box to line things up while watching or listening to multiple videos or movies that started me thinking about it. That pattern was really finicky, and even matching the markings didn't seem to line up properly. I realized I needed something that would take just a little less time and less ongoing cost. Also, I never know if I should put the pattern together in rows or piece by piece, and the pattern page is usually larger than my dining room table, so taping things together gets really awkward really fast. Add 2 kittens who really love to tear paper into the mix, Arts and Crafts Day gets really frustrating. I've already mentioned that I didn't want to waste a lot of printer paper. I'm losing weight, so if I decide to make the pattern again, I'd have to print it out again at a smaller size. With a projector, I can choose the pieces I need to cut smaller, or maybe reuse pieces by placing them over the smaller projection and retracing. I may do this, I may not, depending on whether I want to show the difference in pattern sizing in a video, but it's still a choice I can make. I can also move the projected pattern or the paper I'm tracing onto so there's less waste. Cluster those pattern pieces closer together. I think I mentioned that printer ink is also expensive. I think the last time I bought ink it was over $80. I can't remember if that was for both color and black cartridges or whether it was just per cartridge. With a projector, I can just buy a bulk package of Sharpies from Costco and a 100-foot roll of craft paper from Amazon. You'd be surprised how long those supplies will last. If I can save my printer cartridges for printing actual photos, even better. Also, if I need to do any adjustments and botch the process, I can set up and retrace the piece that I need. I usually save paper leftovers that are big enough to be used for pattern pieces or adjustments, so if I have leftovers the piece will fit onto, I'm not taking any new paper off the roll. I'm also that person who saves paper from packing. For instance, I think the mugs I recently bought from HomeSense were wrapped in packing paper. I saved that paper for tracing. It's pretty flimsy, so it may get pressed into service for tracing skirts or something. I need firmer paper for pieces that will be adjusted or handled more often. I've used old or discount wrapping paper, and you can also get rolls of tissue, usually used in a doctor's examination room, through Amazon. Some folks find that they can skip tracing the pattern altogether and just project the pieces onto the fabric. They then cut out directly on the fabric itself. That's really not an option for me since I've found adjustments are often necessary to get a good fit. Sometimes it's needing to lengthen or shorten a piece. Sometimes it's a full bust adjustment. Either way, having the pattern accessible to even check if you missed a notch or other marking is always a good idea. Dragging the projector out every time might get tedious. Setting up can be a bit of work, and you often have to give the projector some time to cool down afterwards. Bear in mind I've only ever worked with woven fabric. I might change my mind if I try a knit. I do have a nice knit fabric somewhere in the stash that I'd like to try out this autumn/winter season, but we'll see what there's time for. Knits have a lot more stretch, so it's possible I could do a direct cut from the projector and have a dress turn out really nicely. For that, though, I may need to invest in a couple of really large self-healing cutting mats because I get the feeling it would be easier to use a rotary cutter than scissors for this process. So what do you need to get started projector sewing? I use an Epson Ultra Short Throw projector I purchased off eBay for about $125 Canadian total. That's $100 for the projector and $25 for shipping within Canada because I found a seller in Quebec. I did a little checking, and if the light bulb dies, I should be able to purchase another off Amazon. It came with the power cord, and that's about it. While the projector has stickers mentioning a special pen, and the manual I found online said it came with a remote control, those were not included. You can get compatible versions on Amazon or elsewhere. The projector is just old enough that it didn't come with HDMI capability, so I needed to pick up a VGA to USB-C cable to connect to my laptop. The cable is quite short, so I may need to find a larger cable. Or get an HDMI to VGA adapter so I can try plugging in an old Chromecast. Wireless would make things easier. If I could put my computer on the same side of the projector as its ports, the smaller cable might work better, but it's also the side with the exhaust fan for the projector, so I risk unnecessarily overheating my laptop. I guess what I'm saying is, you'll save a lot of money buying the projector second or third hand. That's not a question. These things can go for thousands of dollars new. There will still be some small costs. Some projectors have a flat bottom and are easy to stand on a shelf or some other nearby furniture. Before there were programs to help calibrate your projection, you would use an image file of a grid and project it against a gridded mat on the table, and use bits of paper or what have you to slightly tilt the projector in the right direction to match things up. While I could possibly do this, I was worried the projector would take a dive off of whatever I perched it on, causing damage to both the projector and my floor. I picked up a cheap TV stand. You can order them on Amazon or pick them up at Best Buy. They're pretty easy to find. I think someone also put plans online so you can build your own custom stand. Even so, with the cost of wood these days, you might find it cheaper just to pick up a cheap TV stand. There's a program you can use to calibrate your projection, and it costs about $20 US for a license. There's a free trial if you're not sure it's for you. You're also going to need something to project it on. So if you're going to cut out directly from the projector, a big-ass cutting mat is probably best. Get the biggest mat that you can find if you're plus size, because pants and skirts take up a lot of real estate on the table. If you're planning to trace with markers, find something to put between your paper and your table. We'll get to that in a bit. Setting up your projector. Setting up my projector is pretty easy for me. Others may find this tedious. I currently use the dining room table, so there's a lot of space. This table can probably seat anywhere from 4 to 6 people comfortably when extended, but I think we've managed to crowd about 10 to 12 human bodies of various size at the table at once. Eventually, I will make a cutting table downstairs using old IKEA we've kind of outgrown, but until that time, I use the dining room table like many other sewists. I don't have a huge, enormous cutting mat to protect the surface and create a grid. What I do have is a large piece of gridded wrapping paper that I spread out on the table. I've successfully traced tissue with Sharpie on this paper and not bled through to the table, so that shows how good a job the paper does. Either way, if you're using your dining table, protect the surface. I can take Sharpie ink off the glass top with rubbing alcohol A-OK, but I don't want to risk the wood. If you're using paper, you might want to double or triple your surface. I have a good idea of the size of the surface I'll be working within, so I've already marked the length and the width on the grid and marked down how many inches this takes up. This is important for calibrating the projection. Once the machine is set up and plugged into my computer, I use a program called Project Cut to match up the projectable surface to the marks I made on my paper grid. The real test is when I project a pattern if the test square comes back the right size. You can even move the pattern around in the program if you want to be sure the test square will be the same on the other edge of the projection, no matter where that is. Some folks find that using a mouse with a really long cord or a wireless capability helps line up with the grid. That way you don't have to look at your computer screen and just concentrate on the projection as if it was your computer screen. Now that you're set up, how do you use this thing? Well, number one, I'm going to state the obvious here. This doesn't work with your paper patterns. It's not like an overhead projector. This method only works with your digital files. I just want to be sure that we're all on the, pardon the expression, same page here. Digital files will often come with a few different formats. Sometimes there's a file for standard letter-sized printer paper, sometimes a file for A4, which I think is the similar size that's standard in Europe. Often they will include an A0 file, which is for a plotting printer, so the file that you ship off to your copy shop. Many patterns these days come with projector files included, which is great if, as mentioned, you're cutting out directly from the projection. I just use the same pattern pieces I'd normally use if I was printing and taping. I'll often use the large A0 file that you can send for commercial printing, but if that's missing or not included, there's a program out there called PDF Stitcher, which will take your printed home file and virtually tape it together so you can project it. If your file includes layers for all of the sizes in the pattern, Project Cut will allow you to select only the layers you need. So if you know that you need just a particular size, you can choose it. You can also select multiple sizes and grade between them on the fly if you know what you're doing, or just trace the individual sizes you need so you can mash them up later. If you have a projector file and you don't need to do any adjustments, you may find that there are extra pattern pieces that could be useful. So, for instance, a full bodice or back piece instead of the half piece that you'd place on a fold. This is because the cutting directions for the projector might not specify cutting on the fold, but using the entire width of your fabric depending on the size of your pattern piece. So it doesn't hurt to check the projector file in case there are any pieces you can use as a shortcut, but if you're doing any kind of adjustments, you might just want to use the standard pieces. If you want to save a little bit of paper or try to fit more pattern pieces on a single sheet of the paper you're tracing to, if you have a mouse attached, you can move the pattern around on the screen. The other option is to move your paper. If the pattern piece would slot nicely between two other pieces, but you can't rotate it, just rotate the paper. Remember to wiggle the mouse once in a while or everything will go into a standby mode and your screen will turn blue. And sometimes you'll have to line everything back up again, which is a pain in the butt. When you trace your pattern, remember to put in your markings and label each piece. Otherwise, you'll probably be really confused when you try to put in a dart without the markings, or try to tell your front from your back, etc. When you first get started, tracing can be a real chore. I've gotten faster as I've gained more experience. I've learned things like when to use a ruler and how to mostly freehand my curves. The trick to that last one is not to stare at the point where your marker touches the paper, but a few inches ahead of that point so your hand is playing catch up to your eye. Some patterns take 15 minutes to trace, some a half hour, others take over an hour. While it's tempting to do a marathon session like me, I suggest being a little less enthusiastic. Measure well, cut once, label everything. Learn how to grade between sizes on the fly if you can, and once your pattern pieces are cut out, learn how to do any adjustments you need if you haven't already. I think part of my issue with the Gilbert top was that I cut it out at a size 22 or 24 and didn't adjust for anything. By the time I got around to making the top after making 4 other projects beforehand and embroidering the back yoke, I'd forgotten what size I traced and cut out, which made it a surprise when I finished the shirt and realized it only fit in the shoulders and the bust. If I wasn't actively shrinking and also turning lemons into lemonade and choosing to see it as a layering piece I can wear open-fronted with other clothing, I probably would think that I had wasted a good 2 weeks of labor on a garment I couldn't wear. And now the $64,000 question, should you use a projector? Well, that's really only a question you can answer. If you only make the occasional sewing project, you probably don't need a projector. If you aren't on a time limit and you can take time to print and tape patterns, don't get a projector. If, though, you do a lot of sewing, and I mean on the level where you're making your own wardrobe or sewing entire wardrobes for yourself and your family, including growing children who require new clothes every 2 months, a projector might be for you. If you're a sewing YouTuber, it might be a good investment. If you want to save a bit of paper by snuggling your pattern pieces closer together, using a projector is a good option. If you have serious trouble putting together print and tape patterns, and I mean things don't overlap properly or things never line up, you might want to consider getting a projector. That was one of the reasons that I got a projector, is because I was having trouble getting things to line up properly. If you only use pre-printed paper patterns, don't buy a projector. If you have a monthly subscription to Closet Core and or Seamwork and or Cashmerette's pattern clubs and you avidly sew each one while going through your list to be done from the latest Big 4 digital pattern sale, you might want to consider a projector. There are going to be other reasons why you can or can't or will or won't use a projector, and they're all very specific to the individual. One person may find that they exclusively use knit fabrics, and using a projector to cut directly has helped so much because it takes less time bending over to place and cut pattern pieces. Another will say that they couldn't possibly use it because they use woven fabric and they have to do adjustments and their back can't handle bending over to trace and then cut out their pieces, do the adjustments, and then place and cut out their fabric. Really, only you can make that decision for yourself. I just hope that I've given you more information to be able to make an informed choice.